Can budget Cradlehoof compete in 2025 or what? It's a question that's haunted me for many years. 3 years ago, I actually did a budget series on my Twitch channel back when I was streaming more, and I focused on two archetypes. I focused on Cradlehoof, or the mono green Cradlehoof deck in Lander, and I also focused on mono white Death and Taxes. Um, the reason I picked monocolors is because they are a lot easier to make budget friendly. With the absence of dual lands and fetches, you don't have to spend a lot of your potential proxy slots, of which we allow 10 in the local area. You don't have to spend those proxy slots on fetches or dual lands. You can spend them on bigger ticket items, or you can spend them on points cards like Moxen or Mana Crypt, etc. for fast mana. Um, and when I did that series, uh, the conclusion I came to, as we'll see in a moment, was that you can make a competitive mono green Craterhoof deck for around 400 Canadian at that point. Uh, but as we'll see here, I think you can do it a little cheaper these days. Now I'm going to set out some ground rules right from the beginning. First and foremost, uh, depending on what your community has decided, you might have different proxy rules. You might be able to proxy more than just 10 cards. So all of my opinions when it comes to being a budget-friendly archetype, how much things cost, etc., those are going to be surrounded. Those opinions are going to be from my own experience, based on the community that I currently live in, and also everything is going to be in Canadian dollar, just because I'm Canadian. Uh, so, without further ado, let's get into it. I'm going to show the previous deck that I actually created, and I made this 3 years ago before I had realized that Moxfield was a a much nicer, cleaner space to work in than Tapped Out. Although I don't want to throw shade at Tapped Out at all. They were incredible, and they are still very useful, I'm sure, for quite a lot of people. But personally, I prefer Moxfield at this stage. It just works a little bit better for like my how I view deck building and how I view decks in general. But Tapped Out was is and was super legit, especially when Highlander was starting to break out from the Victoria scene. I remember Tapped Out being one of the first deck builders, maybe the first, that allowed us to have a Canadian Highlander like tag. Anyways, if you want to go check out the rest of the deck list that I have on Tapped Out, you can. My name on Tapped Out is Brantiano. None of them are good. They're all very old. But yeah, let's take a look at this budget Cradlehoof deck that I built. We're going to see a lot of inclusions that we would no longer see today. Things like Decimator of the Provinces, Endray's Forerunners. At some point, I found out that the extra hoof effects, while nice, like they started to get edged out by just really solid, efficient cards. As sort of a lot of the more expensive cards have done over the last 3 to 5 years of Magic. We also aren't going to see things like Greenweaver Druid. if if you play Greenweaver Druid and it gets Orcish Bowmastered, you've actually been sent to the Shadow Realm. Also, things like Hornet Queen, etc. I just don't think they are as necessary at this stage. But a lot of the shell of Hoof, like the architecture of the archetype, just hasn't really changed. Like, we still have as many 1-drops as we're allowed to play. Mana producing elves, that is. We still are focusing on either creatures that make a lot of mana, things like Circle of Dreams Druids, or we're focusing on payoff spells in the form of, previously it was Hornet Queen, etc. But we still are playing Primeval Titan. We're still playing Woodland Bellower, etc. We're still playing some of these larger spells, Natural Order, obviously, Green Sun Zenith, um, Tooth and Nail, and a bunch of Planeswalkers. Uh, so the like general idea behind the archetype hasn't really changed, but just the efficiency of the cards in the archetype has. However, you still get a lot of sort of the old core. And if you were a previous Hoof player who has sort of this core, I would implore you to continue to explore the archetype in 2025. Um, there are a lot of cool additions that we've gotten that I think make the deck pretty strong and give it a lot of smaller pieces of flexibility or smaller strengths that I was really wishing for when we were playing Hoof like 9 years ago. But yeah, and when I made this deck, I basically said this is a budget build of my classic Cradlehoof list. At the time, it was my classic list. And making it inexpensive, the reason I made it monocolored, as I said before, is you get to cut fetch lands, horizon lands, etc. And then I added Greenweaver, Druid, and Endrace Forerunners just as alternative options. But yeah, I did the math previously, and it looks like it was about 400-ish Canadian. I didn't mention this before, but I will be using Face-to-Face as my pricing guide. It is the most common website cited when people are selling cards online, either through Facebook or other means. So it's not my preferred place to shop. I don't mind shopping from face to face, but I find generally their pricing is a little more on the expensive side. But it is really consistent, and I think it's probably the best platform for me to use for this at this point. That being said, if I am using face to face, that's probably the most expensive the cards will get, which bodes well if you look at the final price point and you think to yourself, oh, okay, that's pretty close to what I would be willing to budget to build a Cradlehoof deck. That good news, if you're willing to buy the cards either from other Magic players yourself, or if you're willing to shop around for deals at other stores or online locations, or if you're in the States, you might have a little bit of a different market. So things will probably end up being a little cheaper than what I'm laying out, but this is just the best way for me to remain as consistent as possible. And so at the time, 3 years ago, 400-ish Canadian, that would have gotten you a Cradlehoof list that I feel could be relatively competitive, as long as you were willing to proxy these following cards. Now, this list is old news. Let's take a look at the new one. So this is my budget-friendly Cradlehoof list. It is pretty much the same in terms of the actual shell, but the payoffs are a little different. So we have things like Invasion of Ikoria now, Nissa Who Shakes the World, Vivian Monsters, Advocate. We might have had these before, but I just wasn't playing them. Nissa Ascended Animist is actually a really big deal, especially if you're playing mono green. This, more often than not, is just another version of Cradlehoof Behemoth for you. We're still playing as many 1-drops as we can for speed. Because we're playing mono green, we are including Draga Tree Speaker, although I think if you're playing multiple colors, it's definitely cuttable nowadays. I think it might just be a little too slow, but I think in mono green it still warrants the inclusion, especially since we are pretty pip dense. We are rocking a bunch of 2-drop mana accelerants as well. Raphaelos, Priest of Titania, and Fanatic sort of being the standouts there. And then we're running these creature tutor creatures in Fauna Shaman and Fiend Artisan, as well as some utility creatures like Scavenging Ooze. I previously cut Scrib Ranger from my Hoof lists because I was pretty sure it wasn't good enough anymore. I'm actually starting to come back around on it a little bit. Untapping your creatures, it has sort of never been more relevant, and I really like having a 2-mana 1/1 flash flyer in Hoof. You are sometimes really bad at taking Monarch and the initiative back, and the Scrib Ranger actually just gets in there. a lot of the times if you take Monarch or Initiative, because of the nature of like your threats and how overwhelming they can be, you can actually keep them. But taking it can be challenging. And so I think Script Ranger is actually in a pretty reasonable position here. Also, notably, they've printed a lot of really good X1 flying flash creatures recently. Malcolm Alluring Scoundrel, Fairy Mastermind, etc. And this obviously just blanks those two. It does have the one toughness problem with Bowmasters. The nice thing about Hoof is your whole deck is really, really rough against Bowmasters regardless. I mean, if once you'll know once you play Raphaelos for the first time and they Bowmasters you how bad it feels. So Scrib Ranger, I think, is I don't think you have to worry about the one toughness when you're considering creatures in this archetype unless they cost more than 2 mana and and they provide you a significant advantage. So things like Greenweaver Druid, for example, I wouldn't include because it's 3 mana, and 3 mana is like a significant. There's a significant delta between 2 and 3. And then to top it off, we're just playing some more mana creatures. Voyaging Satyr, I don't think makes it into the multicolored Hoof decks, but I really like it in mono green. You know, just another guy. And I mean, the first time you get to untap Cradle on turn 3 and produce like 8 mana, you're just feeling so good. A couple of walls, some nice 3-drops. Ella Damery could be a couple of other cards, which I'll show when I showcase the pricing of the deck. But I really like it, and it's not too bad in terms of the wallet, so I've kept it here for now. We're running both of the Witnesses. I like running both of the Witnesses when you're running Eldritch Evolution, which we are. And this gives the mono green deck a little more staying power beyond just its planeswalkers. Llanowar Tribe is a slam dunk. Same with Llanowar Visionary. Citizen Petitioner, if you haven't read this one, you gain a life equal to your devotion to green. Let's say you have a couple elves on board. If you play Woodland Bellower against, say, like an aggressive deck, mono red or red white, etc., and you get Citizen Petitioner, you gain 6, and you have a 6/5 and a 2/2 in play. So I really like this combination. I think it's a little underrated. I haven't really seen this card in other Hoof lists beyond Jers. But I've been really impressed with it when we have played it. And I'll link it in the description, but when I played 2025 version of Hoof, a newer version of Hoof, against Jer's Scapeshift deck a little over a month ago, Citizen Petitioner was kind of an all-star. We're playing the 1 initiative creature. Again, we can put ourselves into positions where we're pretty good at holding initiative and tokens, and monarch tokens, but we're not really good at taking them. And being able to Undermountain to take the initiative from someone when they have been racking it up against us is pretty critical as well. We're playing Deep Forest Hermit because, well, it does allow us to go a little wider, and it's really good with Regal Force. But in concert with Cradlehoof Behemoth and Tooth and Nail, it allows our Tooth and Nail to actually win the game a lot of the time as if it's entwined. So if you pay the full 9 mana for the Tooth and Nail, you get that Deep Forest Hermit in. Your Cradlehoof Behemoth is at minimum an 11/11 attacking. If you have one other attacker, you're hitting for, I believe if it's a 1/1, you're hitting for like 19. So generally speaking, you can get people from that position. And if you have 2 or 3 attackers, then you're really off to the races. And then to round out the threat suite, we've got Primeval Titan, which we are playing Dark Depths and Thespian stage combo with. This is sort of your go-to natural order target. This and Woodland Bellower are first and second, I'd say. If you natural order early in the game and you get Primeval Titan plus Dark Depths and Thespian stage, a lot of decks have a really hard time managing both of those threats. Like, generally speaking, decks are good at dealing with one really large threat, but 2 can be a little bit hard to manage. Primeval Titan is a little worse in mono green than it would be in other like 2 or 3 color Hoof archetypes. because you just have less lands to get. And since we aren't playing any of the canopy lands like Horizon Canopy or the black-green one, etc., the blue-black one, I can't remember what they're called. Primeval Titan is a little worse because of that as well. But overall, I mean, it's still just quite excellent, and it's definitely the best natural order target. Uh, our sorceries, we've just got a bunch of ways to find creatures and ways to find Cradle in Sylvan Scrying. Instance, it's the same thing. Once Upon a Time, we don't see this a lot in Lander, but I really like it in this list. Hoof, you have a lot of hands that are like borderline keepable. Maybe a one lander that has some payoffs, but if your elf dies, you're in a pretty awkward position. Once Upon a Time, in the few times I've drawn it, is really solid, very powerful, and 2 mana to look at the top 5 to look for creatures. In a lot of decks, you wouldn't be able to manage that. Like spending 2 mana for that effect would just not be a really good like mana value proposition for you. However, in Hoof, oftentimes you're like looking for ways to spend your mana, and I think Once Upon a Time fits that bill pretty well. We used to play things like Lead the Stampede, and oftentimes it was more so like I'm casting Lead the Stampede and I'm looking for something more specific, like hitting a bunch of elves just didn't really matter. And Once Upon a Time, well, it doesn't allow you to draw all of the creatures that you look at. Just looking so deep, 5 cards to be exact, looking 5 deep for a creature or a land is, I think, pretty relevant. And there are a lot of games where you might play your elf on turn 1, they kill your elf, you play your second land, it's the only land you have, and you cast Once Upon a Time, and all you're looking for is a land. And being able to be that flexible in terms of whether or not you get a land or a creature is why it merits the inclusion, even though some percentage of the time you do have to cast it for 2 mana. Archshooter's Charm is just an unbelievable banger. This card is so good. It finds creatures, it puts lands right into play, so you can get like the surprise Dark Depths if you have enough mana to activate your Thespian Stage that's already in play. You can get Cradle on turn 2. It gives you some removal, which Hoof just has actual 0 of. And then it also lets you exile an artifact or enchantment, which you don't really have a lot of that effect either. So Archshooter's Charm is definitely one of the like newer cards that's really, really exciting for this archetype. Now, if we get into our artifacts, I mean, we're playing fast mana. Fast mana is good. It hasn't stopped being good. So we're dedicating 5 of our points to Mana Crypt and 3 to Soul Ring. We've got Wild Growth as one of our enchantments. There should be another enchantment here, Utopia Sprawl. However, when I was building this, Scryfall is actually down right now. So, excuse me. Moxfield doesn't have the search capabilities, so I just have a 27th Forest here instead. But there should be a Utopia Sprawl here, and I will make the adjustments to the deck when I can. Actually, I guess I'm looking at my my deck list from my personal Moxfield. I'll make sure that the deck list that's on the LJT MTG Moxfield does include the Utopia Sprawl and gets rid of the 27th Forest. And then to round off our land suite, the cool thing about Mono Green Hoof is that the lands just aren't that complicated. Like Ancient Tomb, Dark Depths, Thespian Sage, Nykthos, Dryad Arbor, Westville Abbey, Yavimaya, Cradle, just all bangers, and then 27 forests. I guess 26. So that's the deck list. When I was looking at creating a budget Hoof list, I was trying to be really mindful of, okay, is this competitive? Like, could I see myself bringing this to like a Highlander weekly and 3-1ing or 4-0ing? And the answer to this is yes. This deck looks very similar to something that I would bring, even if I was considering playing fetch lands and a second or a third color, or maybe even a fourth color. Notable exclusions from this list are things like Atraxa as a natural order target, Grist if you wanted to be in black, Minsk and Boo if you wanted to be in red, Mawlock if you were in red, etc. But the core of this deck is actually very, very similar. Like, there aren't a lot of cards that are different, or there will be different cards, but they serve very similar roles. Like, in terms of, I replaced a threat with a threat. I replaced like a mana elf with a mana elf, for example. So I do actually think that this list is relatively competitive. And the really good news is that I did the math. I crunched the numbers, and based on this Google sheet that I will be linking down below as well, if you are leveraging a 10 proxy rule at your locals, you can get every card in this deck at the face-to-face pricing, which I'll remind you is probably the most expensive pricing you're going to find. You can get all of this for $289.50. And now, I know you might be saying, well, Trenton, that's not very budget. That's a lot of money. And it is. I will address that other people have different ideas of what budget might mean for them, and budget might be different for you than what it means for us. But the reality is that we are playing a 100 cards singleton format that is eternal. And so a lot of the cards that we're playing just have a little bit of a higher average like dollar cost than you would find in potentially other formats. The thing that I love about how low this is in comparison to like other numbers that we could look at, let's harken back to the 400 Canadian that it was 3 years ago when I made the budget list, is if you're trying to play a standard deck, unless you're playing one of the like less expensive standard decks, generally speaking, standard is more expensive than $289.50. So I love that we've been able to take this deck that is definitely a proven archetype in Highlander, kept it competitive, like kept it relatively competitive, but also kept the cost lower than what it would cost you to play standard. And that's not even mentioning things like you just might own some of these cards, right? Like, how many people own a Soul Ring, or how many people own Summoner's Pact, or Vivian Monsters Advocates. You might have these planeswalkers just sitting around in your binders. So I really love that I was able to get the cost this low. However, I did want to go as low as I felt was reasonable, but still remaining competitive. And I made this other column here for alternative cards to the next, I believe it's 5 highest costed cards in the deck, to make it as cheap as possible, as budget as possible. So we've got, instead of Circle of Dreams Druid, you just placed Greenweaver Druid. They both died at Bowmasters anyways, so it doesn't matter. Eladamri Corvictol is definitely better than Augur of Autumn, but maybe not at this price point. Fnatic of Ronis, Paradise Druid. Again, Fnatic is quite a lot better than Paradise Druid, but we were playing Paradise Druid for a long time, and it was totally solid. Noble Hierarch, maybe we're playing Gilded Goose instead, Maybe Noble Hierarch takes a seat. And then Regal Force. I included Regal Force because I personally love the card, and I think when you are playing the Deep Forest Hermit with Tooth and Nail, having a Regal Force as an option to Tooth and Nail, once it resolves, maybe they're thinking like, oh, I'll just Swords to Plowshares their Cradlehoof Behemoth, and then I'll Wrath of God the board the next turn. And instead, you identify that could be a possibility, so you end up getting Regal Force plus Deep Forest Hermit to draw 6 cards, and then you're right back in the game after they cast Supreme Verdict or Wrath or Day of Judgment or what have you. But we can also just replace it with something like End-Raise Forerunners. Let's just play another hoof effect. And then for Yavimaya, it is really excellent. Yavimaya is quite good. We have Rafellos considerations. Yavimaya lets you bounce back other lands to your hand with Querying Ranger. So let's say you have a Yavimaya and a Gaia's Cradle out. You can return your Gaia's Cradle with Querying Ranger to replay it to add more mana that turn. So it is quite excellent. But, I mean, if your budget doesn't allow, then I would just play Forest. And with all of these alternatives, we get the total cost down to $211.50. And this is full retail. If you're trading for these cards, if you're looking for deals, I guarantee you can find it for a lot less. So I don't think I have much more to say other than you might notice this line with 27 forests. I'd say the only thing that isn't budget friendly about this list is I do recommend getting 26 to 27 Guru forests. They really add a lot of flavor to the deck. I think you do win more when you're playing with them. So, you know, if you can spare the expense on this budget list, I'd say, yeah, spend the cool $21,600 on them. I think you'll thank me for it later. All right. That's all I have for this edition of our budget series. I want to ask you to like, comment, and subscribe. And for the comments, I'd specifically love to hear how you liked this, whether or not you felt it was informative, and what are some decks that you'd like us to look into in the future. This time I shared a monocolored deck, but we're not necessarily always going to do those. They are the easiest to make budget because of the mana-based considerations, but when we bring out this type of video, we want to make sure that we're focusing on not only how budget can we make these things, but also, like, can we still keep them competitive, and can we make multicolored decks, decks that people like playing of sort of different ilks, like artifacts, etc. Like, can we bring those costs down as well? And then I'd also implore you in your local scene, if you're trying to get things started, we use a 10 proxy rule in Victoria, but you can always do more. The only caveat I would add to that is to check with your local game store to ensure that they're okay having you use proxies or playtest cards or what have you. You want to make sure that you're not endangering the status of your LGS. But yeah, I would implore you to have more than 10 proxies. We have a 10 proxy rule for specific reasons, like specific to our location. So, but I know a lot of other places that play Highlander will have, you know, you can play as many proxies as you want, or we have a 20 proxy rule or a 30 proxy rule. And once you get to those stages, I mean, the cost of the decks just works itself out. Thank you all for your time, and I hope you enjoyed it. I love Cradlehoof more than anyone, I'd say, so I'm even just happy to talk in the comments about Hoof. If you want to start throwing down about what's good and what isn't, you know, I'm there.